Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today I want to talk about my two Strats. I've had a few different Strats over the years, and I've whittled them down to two, and I have them right here. One is a black 2013 Fender American Standard, very ubiquitous guitar, pretty much everywhere, and the other is a slightly older 1999 Fender Deluxe. This is the Stratocaster Deluxe, obviously, and it utilizes the ash bodywood, which I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I haven't done a video on Strats in a while, and I think the last one I did was on this specific Strat when I received it. I bought it maybe 2 or 3 years ago. You can check out that video. I'll have it linked below if you haven't seen it. But otherwise, the reason that I bought this Strat is because I love this Strat so much. This was my very first Stratocaster, and I bought it locally here off of a guy who had a studio. He was getting rid of it. It looks like it's been played quite a bit. There's a lot of wear on the fretboard right at the 7th fret, I guess. Beyond that, there's not any discernible wear, and we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But this is a great guitar. This is a US-made Fender Stratocaster from 2013. I don't know if they're all this great, but this one made me fall in love with the Stratocaster form factor, the Stratocaster single coil pickups, position 1 through 5, all of them. I like some more than others, but that made me say, okay, I've got enough Stratocasters here. One is typically enough of any guitar. Of course, that's debatable unto itself. I have obviously more than one, but that's because I decided, you know what? 2020, I believe it was, maybe 2021, Fender announces that they're going to stop production of ash body Stratocasters. So that just sealed the deal for me. I was like, okay, well, I need to get an ash body Stratocaster because chances are this one is an alder body, which is, I think it's a little more common in the modern era, especially for painted guitars where you don't see the wood grain. That would be an alder body. And if it's a Fender Japan or a Squier, then it would quite possibly be basswood or poplar. So I don't know if anybody cares about tone woods in their instrument choice, but I don't think that it has a huge yay or nay, yes or no, up or down quality on a guitar. You can have a guitar that sounds great with both, but there are some tone woods that I tend to gravitate to, and ash on a Stratocaster I think I gravitate towards, mostly because it's a beautiful wood and it's one that they leave exposed in most cases. So you see beautiful rings and figuring and little bird's eye even speckled about. It's a really, really beautiful guitar tone wood. And they've been making Strats in ash for a long, long time. I don't think that it was the very first body. I think that the alder was the first Strat body. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But in any event, you'll find a lot of 60s and late 50s ash body Stratocasters with bursts or natural or, you know, a number of different paint options. So this one was purchased with those two things in mind. Number one, I love this Strat. Number two, they're stopping production on ash body Stratocasters. And just a little truth be told, if you look at Fender's catalog today, there are lots of ash body Stratocasters in different colors and variations, models, you name it. So they haven't gone away from it entirely. I'm not going to say that it's a bluff, but I will say that it made me buy this guitar, or it gave me the impetus to say, I'm going to add an ash body Stratocaster. And this one's from 1999, which, for what it's worth, that's the year I graduated high school, so kind of have a strong affinity for that year. And this one just called my name. And I got a pretty good deal on it. So this was right, I think I bought it the day that they announced it. So the market hasn't really had a chance to adjust. And I think that the older ash body Stratocasters did get a slight bump due to that announcement. But in any event, I want to talk about these two guitars.
So, since we've got them both right here before we have anything plugged in, let's talk about what's different, and then we can talk about what's same, and then here are the two and compare them side by side. So first of all, the headstock is very similar on both of these guitars. I think it's...
So, since we've got them both right here before we have anything plugged in, let's talk about what's different, and then we can talk about what's same, and then hear the two and compare them side by side. So first of all, the headstock is very similar on both of these guitars. I think it's the same size. They change slightly throughout the years. They get bigger, they get smaller, but these ones look pretty much the same. Beyond the headstock, it's very characteristic of the Strat. It has the Fender logo with Stratocaster, Fender Stratocaster on both. And this one's called the Spaghetti logo on the Deluxe. And I believe it's due to the color, actually. It's got kind of a pasta-y, lighter color. And on the Fender standard American Strat is a silver Fender logo. So that's silver on the Fender and the Stratocaster. It looks a little black just because the letters get small, but I do think it is silver all the way across. Maybe it's black, I don't know. But the main Fender logo does have silver in it. So that's one small difference. We also have different pickups. These are the first generation noiseless pickups. I believe they were the N1 Fender noiseless pickups, and this is really the first generation of these pickups, and they evolve throughout the years. And I actually did own a Stratocaster Deluxe that I recently sold that had later Fender N, I don't know, maybe fourth generation noiseless pickups, and they sounded really good too. So it's an evolving pickup that kind of starts here, and it's not like an active pickup or anything like that. It's just a little more fancy, we'll say. And eventually you get what's called the S1 switch on the first volume knob, and that's just a boost. I think it's a 10 or maybe 15 dB boost that's built into the circuit without having to have an active preamp in the circuit. So that's kind of cool. This one doesn't have it because it's old. This is like I said, the very first generation of the noiseless pickups. So they're kind of basic. They're just a sound. They don't have any more advanced electronics or push-pulls, yada yada. Just 3 single coils in the realm of a Stratocaster. They're trying to really mimic this with eliminating kind of the noise that's inherent in this design. And if you're not familiar, the Stratocaster was built in 1954. At least it was released in 1954. It was probably built prior to that and tinkered with and shaved down. But this is really what they decided on. It hasn't changed much since 1954. The one thing that has changed is that we now have a 5-way switch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whereas the early Stratocasters, up until I think the 1980s, even their 1987 relaunch, they had or maybe it's 1977, but either way, into the 70s and 80s, this was a 3-way switch, and guitarists would kind of notch it in between and find that it would work. So Fender was like, oh, you know what, we'll just make it a 5-way switch. And that was one of the big design changes of this guitar throughout the years. Beyond that, the knob layout has changed. In the 80s, they, cutting costs, they went to 2 knobs. The input here the output was very much relocated to various spots, sometimes on the pickguard. I think sometimes they just routed it out here on the side. So those are things that change throughout the years, but for the most part, the body shape remains exactly the same. The contours are exactly the same. The fact that we have this tremolo that requires the back to be routed out and kind of top loaded with this pickguard, that's all the same. The bridge, pretty much the same. The radius of the fretboard changes throughout the years. I believe it started at a pretty small 7.5 degree radius. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong on that, but they kind of settled on 9.5 inch radius for the Stratocaster standard and the Deluxe for that matter. So those are the same. And I believe the frets are medium jumbos, or I don't know. I think the frets are very different. They feel bigger on the standard from 13 than they do the Deluxe from 99. So keep that in mind. Smaller frets on the Deluxe and larger as we progress in time. We should all have a bone nut on both of these. I think the only variation in nut that you'll see is if it has a humbucker in the first position. If it's an HSS Fender Deluxe Stratocaster, then it'll have some fancy nut, but I'm not too familiar with that. Just do your research if you're looking for specific bone specs on guitars. There you go, 3 coils. And like I said, the single coils were noisy. That's why these pickups were developed, to try to capture the Strat tone while taming some of that that noise, 60-cycle hum that is inherent to single coil pickups. And it's not like a stacked humbucking design. There's some other magic circuitry, I believe, in there that is, again, not active, but that's controlling the noise out of these pickups. So they're very Stratty. You're not getting a completely different guitar with the noiseless pickups. They're just a little quieter than your average Strat. To that note, I would not consider this a very noisy guitar. This is very quiet unto itself. And let's get into the same. Now, we do have a 2-point trem on the Fender standard Stratocaster from 2013. Same with the Deluxe 2-point. That is one of those specs that changes throughout the year. I believe it goes from a 5-screw design to a 2-screw to maybe there's a 3-screw in there. I'm not entirely sure, but that spec of the bridge will design how the trem affixes to the body. Other than that, the saddles on the standard are what you usually find. They're pretty machined out, and they don't have much by way of metal in there. It's not like a giant brick of metal holding your string into the bridge, which the bridge on the Deluxe is much more like that. If you take a look at these saddles, they are big chunks of steel, I assume, or some other metal, and they are touching the body quite a bit more than the other saddles, I think, and I believe that that is supposed to help with resonance and vibration and sustain. These are all kind of split in hair sciences we're talking about, but you can tell that the bridge is pretty much the same style, only this one is a lot thicker, actually. It's a thicker material. It's like a bent plate steel, and it has that 2-point trem style there. Otherwise, our dimensions are exactly the same. This guitar is a Stratocaster, just like this one. The pickguard is the same dimensions. Our knob layout is exactly the same. We have 3 knobs, 1 volume, 2 tone, and a 5-way switch in the same exact spot with the angled output jack. So that's how your guitar affixes the cable to the amp, and yeah, that's it. A very important thing to note on a Stratocaster is that it's a 4-bolt construction, which means that it has 4 bolts holding the neck onto the actual body, and they are not built or glued as one. There are 2 separate units that are meant to be modular, and they just affix like this with 4 bolts. Fender also developed the micro tilt system, which is a little hole here where if you get a tool in there, can't remember if it's an Allen key or a very small screwdriver, then you can twist a little screw that allows the neck to tilt one way or the other. There is a truss rod to be affected, and that's in the very top of the headstock here. So both of these have the same location of where the truss rod is accessed. Sometimes you'll see these capped off, and the truss rod will be accessed from the bottom of the neck where it joins the guitar. But in this case, both of our truss rods are on the neck in the same position with the standard walnut capping. That's also one of the small little details to look for if you're holding a Stratocaster and you're not sure if the neck either belongs to the guitar, or if it says something that you don't quite believe, then check this little truss rod area. On most Fender Strats, it should be a bit of walnut. If it's plastic or bare at all, then that means that it's not a Fender USA product. It's either Fender Mexico if it has the plastic barrel, or if it's just bare, there's nothing in there at all, that's usually a Squier product from overseas. One thing I forgot to mention is that the Fender Stratocaster Deluxe does have locking tuners. So these are Fender branded locking tuners, and the Fender Strat Standard does not. It has regular old Fender, just kind of normal tuners, which I have no problems with. I think these are just fine. But if you can put locking tuners on a guitar and make it a spec from the factory, that is a win-win in my book. So I lean towards the Deluxe for that aspect alone. It's just so nice having locking tuners on a guitar. And that's pretty much where the differences end. Everything else on these guitars should be very, very similar. We should all have a poly finish, a polyurethane finish on both of these guitars, which is plastic, and some people say it's not as breathable or whatever as nitrocellulose that you'll find on a Gibson. But you know, I have absolutely no issues with these guitars sounding bad because they have kind of a plastic protective coat on the outside. And the thing I do like about poly is that it is super protective. If you get just a dent or bump it into something or a small scratch, it's not the end of the world because there's a pretty thick coat of polyurethane on both of these guitars and they're pretty protected. Some see it as a downside. I don't necessarily see it as such. But that's what we got here. Two Strats from roughly almost 15 years apart, but pretty close. And Fender USA, they both have the skunk stripe on the back of the neck. That's how they install the truss rod on this style of neck. Whenever they do have the pokey bit up top, then you'll have to have the back routed out and a walnut skunk stripe placed in there. That's kind of characteristic of both Strats and Tellys. And speaking of Telly, the Stratocaster did get released after the Telecaster. The Telecaster was Leo Fender's very first release of an electric solid body guitar, and it was a huge success. And the follow-up to the Telecaster was the Precision bass, the P bass. And that's where things get really contoured and the body starts to get a lot more rounded off instead of blocky like a chunk of wood that the Telecaster is. And that's where the Stratocaster evolved from the P bass more so than the Telecaster. So a little interesting fact there. Of course, the pickups don't share anything in common with the P bass, but the shape of the Stratocaster and the older style P bass are they start to share a bit more characteristics than the Telecaster and the P bass, or the Telecaster and the Stratocaster. All right, the last thing I want to do before plugging these in is get a few specs. I've been asked recently to take a few more specs on these guitars just so people have a little bit of a reference when purchasing their own. So here, we're going to go ahead and do that right now. And I'm going to get the nut width and make sure we're in inches. We're at 1.68 nut width on the Fender Stratocaster American Standard. And for the Deluxe, 1.69. So not much variation there. I think that's pretty standard amongst most Stratocasters in the modern era. So 1.68, 1.69 width at the nut. Let's take the 12th fret width. That's 2.05 inches on the Deluxe, 2.05, 2.03 on the Standard. All right, so there you go. Let's go ahead and see if I can get this 12th fret neck depth. Do it right at the 12th fret. 0.90 is what it is actually. So 0.9 on the 12th fret, 0.87 on the 12th fret of the Standard. So it is slightly slimmer by, you know, a couple hundredths of an inch, but it's, I don't know, it's not what I would call noticeable in any regard. So there are a few specs. I'll try to get the first fret neck depth here as well. It's looking like 0.81 on the Standard, 0.79, very, very similar on the Deluxe. So there's a few specs for you. These necks, again, would be interchangeable. I think if you swap necks on these guitars, you'd be hard-pressed to notice which was which, and especially with a blind test. So we're not going to do any of that. I'm not terribly interested in finding out what makes these guitars different. Most of all, I love how similar they are, and that may seem like kind of a redundancy. Why would I want two guitars that are so similar? It doesn't work that way, unfortunately, with guitars. Each one is unique. Each feels different based on its color and how the light catches it and how it interacts with different amplifiers, and the pickups are different. So there's enough characteristic difference built into both of these guitars where they're both justified in my book. And I just wanted to play a few of them and share what they sound like. All right, we're plugged in, ready to rock and roll. I've got the Strat American Standard plugged in first, just because it's the most ubiquitous guitar, I don't know, in most rock bands, I guess. I think Fender did a study recently, and 9 out of 10 guitarists who play live or gig live play a Fender or Fender Strat, or possibly a Telecaster. But either way, this is a very, very popular guitar. So we've got the Fender American Standard plugged into my Marshall 1987X Plexi head. It's a 50-watt head, slightly off screen here, but the cabinet that it's plugged into is right behind me. It's this orange 2x12 PPC cabinet loaded with 2 Celestion creamback speakers. I've got the Sennheiser E906 dynamic microphone right over this right speaker, kind of off the cone, just off center of the cone, but that's being plugged into my Focusrite Scarlett 18920 user interface that is capturing the sound. So this guitar sounds like this. So this is a fairly clean Marshall amp. I've got channel number 2 engaged, and it's on about 4 in the volume, and I'm being plugged into my pedal board, but nothing is engaged right now. So that's your clean sound. I'm in the bridge pickup right now, and if you really dig in, you can get this thing to break up a little bit, but it's not really what I would call in metal territory or anything like that. This is a very conservative setting on this amplifier, and it does get a little close to break up if you crank on it. That's in position B, or 1, we'll say. I can't remember if they have the number 1 through 5. I believe it's 1 is bridge, 5 is neck, and all of the stops in between. But we'll say position 2 for now is the bridge and middle engaged. And I believe what they do with the middle pickup is that they wind it out of phase with the other ones. So it's supposedly kind of a hum canceling sound. And just for reference, there's our single coil bridge on its own. It's not noisy at all. It's not the most quiet sound out of an amplifier, but it's pretty quiet. When you go to setting number 2, then you're supposedly having some hum canceling effects by way of how these magnets are arranged. So that's number 2. Very Stratty sound. That's used in a lot of different contexts. A little funky. That's position number 2. Position number 3 is just the middle pickup. That one's getting a little closer to break up on its own. But very recognizably Stratty sounds. Position 4 is one of my favorites. This is usually the sweet spot in a Strat for me. One of the Strattiest sounding settings that you can get on a Strat for me, and it's very unique to the Strat and recognizable almost instantly. Nice, sweet sounding single coil sounds. Again, utilizing that out of phase middle polarity magnet, whatever you want to call it, to engage a bit more hum canceling effects. But now just the neck pickup on a Strat, also very recognizable, rich and warm. Kind of bluesier, really nice and clean and warm. And of course, in any one of these positions, 1 through 5, you can engage a tube screamer and kick on a little dirt. So it gets pretty heavy immediately. You start to get that breakup, and the tube screamer and the Strat and the Marshall are just such a sweet sounding, sweet spot of a setup that you just can't go wrong with that alone. But I do have a few other pedals here. Let's see what the DS1 sounds like. This is a Boss pedal. Got it cranked a little heavier on the distortion. A bit noisier with the DS1 in the bridge. Let's go to position 2 and engage that DS1. A little bit quieter. Pretty heavy. The thing can still get heavy. That's what I love about the Stratocaster, and I think that a lot of people consider it more of just like a lighter, clean guitar to slightly dirty, and don't really let it go into that heavy rock area. And you know, Kurt Cobain obviously thought differently. He had several Strats and played it very heavily. And a lot of guys throughout the 90s did wield a Strat in a heavy way, but today I don't think this guitar is regarded in the same way. I think that people think it's a little more precious sounding, has real glassy cleans, and is very slinky. And I say that because it is, we haven't mentioned the scale length, it is a 25.5 inch scale length, which is quite a bit longer than the Gibson counterpart. So that's something that's noticeable on the Strat, and a little less noticeable on the Tele, which has the same scale length. But I think the Strat feels longer to me for some reason, and I like it. I like the added room. It's a little slinkier on the strings. You can bend a little bit more, and there's just a little more real estate between the nut and the bridge, about that much. So that's something that I enjoy about Fender products, is that longer scale length. So there's a quick demonstration of what this guitar is capable of with a pretty recognizable tube amp and a couple of recognizable pedals. Let's plug in the Deluxe and see what she sounds like. All right, here we are with this sexy blonde beast. Here's what it sounds like. Sounds like a Strat to me. That's the bridge position. Let's just quickly go through position 2. Sounds a lot like a Strat, very recognizable once again, similar to position 2. They haven't made quite a departure between generation 1 and future generations of these noiseless pickups, so I think if you are more inclined towards a strict vintage sound, then go with the earlier generation of noiseless pickups if it's at all available. So that's what I would recommend there. Here's middle. And neck, position 5. This seems a bit boomier in the bass to me. I don't know if it'll come through in the recording, but I do sense a bit more bass out of these pickups, and I'm not sure if that's attributable to the Swamp Ash tone wood. And again, people say that it doesn't matter anyway because it's encased in plastic. So there's a lot that can go into really altering the sound and making these guitars unique. One thing we haven't talked about is the trem system. I did have this open so I could show you what this looks like. So these strings get strung through here, and they actually are kind of string through design that way because this is a block that's the thickness of the body that holds the trem in place, and then these springs are anchored on the other side and they act as the whammification of the whole system. So you can lock one side out so that it only bends in one way or the other, but right now there are 5 really tight springs, so it's kind of cranking it so that it's up against the wood here and acting almost as a stop tail in that direction. So that's a small glimpse into the construction of this cavity, which I can't do on the other one because I have a plate there. I typically leave the trem arm in the case. I don't even apply it because I just don't use that in my day-to-day playing. Maybe I'll get to a point where I do eventually, but maybe that makes me a bad Strat player. I don't know. Either way, I just use it kind of locked out, and with the locking tuners, it helps stay in tune a bit more as well. That's one thing I wanted to mention. These are brand new strings on both of these guitars. I recently restrung every guitar in my collection, which took a while, but we did it, and now these ones are already out of tune. So let me tune them up real quick. All right, let's add a little dirt. Tube screamer first. One thing I will notice, these pickups are much quieter. So I'm in the neck pickup. Let me go all the way to the bridge again. These are definitely quieter and still have the same bite when you engage them. So that's one thing to note, is that these pickups are pretty freaking quiet, even with a little dirt and the tube screamer in. Let's see if that carries over to the DS1. Definitely a lot more noise coming through just by engaging the pedal, but I think it's going to sound pretty good. Well, I'd say that sounds a lot better with these pickups with the DS1. It's a lot tighter, a lot less, I don't know, just noisy. It's just a little more noiseless. So that's That's a pretty rockin' tone. That's heavy. It's not the heaviest thing on the pedal board. Let's actually test that, the metal zone, with a Fender Strat. I like it. I think that the metal zone is probably a bit overkill on the standard, but we got to try it now. So, actually not nearly as bad as I thought. And this is not set at the most extreme settings. We have the level at about 50 on the metal zone and the distortion off to about 65%. And then the tones are kind of in the middle to mitigate some of those weird frequencies in the middle. But that's surprisingly not as noisy or flubby as I thought it would be. So the metal zone, again, it's doable with the Strat. People don't think of this as a metal guitar, and I'm not saying that it is, but it's way more capable than a lot of people want to give it credit for. And I actually read this. This is going to be a slight small tangent. I read this a little while back. There was somebody talking about just what kind of music is it okay to play with a guitar. And somebody asked in this forum, is it okay to play Metallica on a Strat? And there was a lot of hate, just like, no, man, you can't do that. That's not cool. It's not built for that or whatever. And, you know, I'm not going to tell anybody what to play. I think that the guitar you have in your hands right now is the guitar that you should play the music that you want to play through right now. So use it. Use it to play Fleetwood Mac if you want. Use it to play Post Malone. Use it to play your own music. I highly encourage that. But if you want to play Metallica on a Strat, you go right ahead. Let's go ahead and do it right now. And that's about enough of that. But there you go. You can play Metallica on whatever the hell you want. If you want to play it on a ukulele, go. There's actually videos on YouTube right now, I guarantee, of someone playing Metallica on a ukulele. So don't let anybody tell you what to play, or more importantly, what not to play based on whatever instruments you happen to have in your possession. Having said that, would that be my first application for this guitar? Probably not. I love the Strat for many, many reasons, and I love it because you can play metal with it. Doesn't mean that that's what you should always play with it, but hell, it can do it, so there you go. So I would love to know what your thoughts are on the Fender American Standard, if you have one from 2013 or somewhere approximately close to that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this guitar and how it's worked for you. Similarly, if you have a 90s, late 90s or early 2000s Fender Stratocaster Deluxe, and you want to tell me what you think of that instrument, I would love to hear what you have to say. My thoughts are clear. I love both of these guitars. They are super fun to play. I always enjoy picking it up, and they always inspire me to play something new and exciting, and I love that about the Fender Stratocaster. The Gibson line of guitars obviously are very good too, and they have their own thing going on, but I think if I had to choose and limit my collection to one guitar, it might be the Stratocaster. It might be the Stratocaster. So there you go. My humble opinion. Let me know what you think. If you have any comments, I would love to hear what you have to say. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this style of content. That always helps me determine what to make in the future. Otherwise, we hope to see you on the next one.